And I have coffee.
What are you drinking out of there, Dan?
What?
What are you drinking out of there?
A nice little tumbler.
I should go grab mine.
I don't normally eat breakfast. It's 10 in the morning, and I have to drive afterwards. And I thought that drinking bourbon right now would probably be a bad decision.
Yeah, I would say so.
So we're going to stick to the coffee.
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
I'm tired, and I'm Dan.
And I am Gold Eagle Jake. Not tired.
And we're coming to you at 10 a.m. on a Saturday because this is the only time that Dan was going to let us record.
It's the holidays. We all got shit we got to do, man. Come on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the week of Thanksgiving, Black Wednesday. A lot going on our normal recording day.
Yeah, we hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. How was your guys? I know what Dan did.
Yeah, so my family decided to go to Jamaica, and I was not on the invite list, apparently. So I had a buddy down, and we smoked some brisket, smoked some mac and cheese, and then watched Napoleon. Total letdown. Spoiler alert. Save your money on Napoleon. But that was my Thanksgiving. Can't complain.
Mine was not too eventful. As you know, it's a very busy week at the store, so the whole family just kind of used Thursday to reset and relax and just take it easy. That was nice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I smoked a turkey. I had a lot of Michter's 10 rye.
Nice. I actually didn't drink any whiskey. I had just a couple glasses of wine and a couple beers.
I had a few glasses of wine and then two pours of whiskey.
You were drinking wine with Adam.
Adam's a big wine drinker, and he we had a bottle with lunch, so we had a nice Pinot with the brisket and mac and cheese.
Oh, look at you!
Probably the first time I've drank wine in 2 years, but got to mix it up every once in a while.
Good for you. Being classy.
I'm a cultured bitch, you guys. Come on.
So speaking of Dan being a cultured bitch, just kidding. That has nothing to do with.
It has nothing to do with anything.
We are continuing our series on the Big Six, Kentucky distilleries, and we are going to be talking about Beam Suntory today. Which basically is all the Jim Beam and Jim Beam affiliated labels, such as your Knob Creek and Baker's and Basil Hayden's and so on. Do you have a full list of labels, Dan?
I do work for this podcast or what? Jesus. I have the same stuff, similar information put together for the.
I'll look it up then.
I know I have it all right here. Shut your mouth.
Well, but we're just focusing on the Jim Beam brands
side
from
of things, yes.
Kentucky Distillery.
Yep.
Right.
So
yeah, we're not going to be talking about the Japanese whiskey.
Not any of the
like
Japanese stuff, just American whiskey.
Yep.
Did you mention Old Granddad?
No, I have all those things listed out by mash bill.
Yeah, Dan, go ahead and
go ahead.
Just jump into it.
Thank you. Jeez, you guys are all testy this morning. Just want to do my work on my podcast. So Beam, very old distillery. So at 1795, Jacob Beam started distilling corn whiskey, and it was under the name Old Jake Beam Sour Mash. And basically, he was distilling whiskey, and until 1880, the only way to get his whiskey was to go to the distillery and fill up your jug. So I could just see, like we were doing our podcast back in the 1800s, that the shelf behind Jake would just be all 3X jugs that he was taking to the Beam distillery.
Hell yeah.
Just putting his, hey, fill this up. 1880, they changed the name and started selling their product under Old Tub, and they started bottling at that point too. So by 1880, they started to actually have bottles on shelves under the Old Tub label.
Do you know where that comes from? Old Tub?
I didn't go into that deep.
Jesus.
Did the bare minimum to
Continue.
get the information I needed for the podcast today. I'm not going to lie on that. During Prohibition, they were shut down. Unlike Buffalo Trace, they didn't get a medicinal whiskey license to be able to continue opening or staying open. But in 1933, after Prohibition ended, they rebuilt the distillery from scratch in Clearmont. And then in 1943, they changed the name from Old Tub to Jim Beam. And since they've made the name change, they've been the number one selling bourbon in the world.
What's who is Jim Beam?
Jim Beam was one of the Beam families. It started with Jake Beam. It's all
Just
there's
one of
7 generations.
One of Jacob's sons
Yeah.
or grandsons.
And so, fun fact:
1980s. Go ahead.
Oh, real quick. Old Tub was named after the large mash tubs, which they used to stir and cook by hand.
Okay. Nice.
Gotcha. Oh, it was
Google.
also, I think it was Jake Beam, when he started, he was so concerned about his yeast strain that every day he'd take it home. He'd take home some of his yeast strain just in case something that just happened at the distillery. He'd still have his yeast to be able to make his product again.
Smart.
Yeah,
kind of a
that is a very good point to add.
87, they purchased a bunch of brands. So they purchased Old Crow, Old Grandad, and Old Taylor, which then was eventually sold off to Sazerac. And that's why Sazerac has the Colonel Taylor line. August 4th, 2003, they had a fire that destroyed one of their aging warehouses that had 15,000 barrels of whiskey in it. Fire went on for a long time and ended up getting in some streams and killed a lot of fish because they got drunk on bourbon. Then 16 years later, July 3rd, 2019, they had another warehouse start on fire and lost 45,000 barrels. They've had 7 master distillers in the company history. Almost all have been a Beam last name, except for the last 2 were Fred Bookerno and Fred No. Fred Bookerno actually married the daughter of Jim Beam, and that's how they got into the family. So it's been basically run by family since they started. That's kind of just a brief rundown of their history. They are very similar to Buffalo Trace in the fact that they have a low rye mash bill, a high rye mash bill, and a rye mash bill. So their low rye, we actually know what their mash bills are. Their low rye is 77 corn, 13 rye, 10% wheat. And in that line, you will find your Jim Beam, you will find your Old Crow, your Bakers, your Knob Creek, your Bookers and Little Book. Old Top and Hardins Creek is all underneath the low rye mash bill. The high rye mash bill, which is 63% corn, 27% rye, 10% malt, is Basil Hayden Old Grandad. You have your rye, which is going to be Old Overholt, Jim Beam Rye, Knob Creek Rye. And then finally, there's a different mash bill for Legion, which is 75% corn, 13% rye, 12% malted barley. Those are your main brands underneath the Jim Beam label. And when we talk about Hardins Creek, that's a newer one. So they came out a few years ago with Hardins Creek, which is a 2-year release, and Jacob's Well, which is a 15-year. And I know Jake's probably excited to talk about it. This year, they've done a limited release of Hardins Creek, which is a 17-year, but they have 3 different names, Clearmont, Frankfurt, and Boston. And I think Jake's treating them like Pokemon and trying to catch them all.
I'm still waiting on the Boston.
Still waiting on the Boston. Is that a hint for Jake? Is that just kind of a casual drop right there?
He's dropped the hint.
With that new Hardins Creek line, with the Clearmont, Frankfurt, Boston, they're all 17-year. It's all the exact same. The only difference is they were aged in either Clearmont, Kentucky, Frankfurt, Kentucky, or Boston. They did have a distillery in Boston, which is why they used Boston as a place to age as well. So that's kind of the new experiment that's out. So if you want to see what different climates do to aging, it's a good experiment. We can talk about if I think that the price is right on that or not. That's fine to do. But that's kind of just the basic rundown of Jim Beam. So, and I know when we did our Save 6 Distilleries If the World Was Going to End, I know we all had Jim Beam on our list. One, there's a lot of history. 2, they make a lot of great products. But I think it's kind of a good start to start talking about some Jim Beam things.
Yeah. So can you read the low rye mash bill one more time?
The low rye is Jim Beam, Old Crow, Bakers, Knob, Booker's and Little Book, Old Top, and Hardin's Creek.
And it's weeded?
No, it's rye. Low rye and high rye. Same as Buffalo Trace.
Oh, I thought you said wheat at some
No.
point. Okay. My bad. So yeah, I mean, like all of the beam brands are pretty well known. A lot of people I think get started on Basil Hayden just because it's so low proof and smooth. And then we've talked a lot about Knob Creek on this show. It's one of Jake's favorites, right?
Mm-hmm.
Drinking that.
I mean,
barrel
I
pick.
can't tell you how many times I get asked what my favorite bourbon is, so I had to pick something to answer that question with every time. And I do really like Knob Creek Single Barrel, so I would probably say yes, that Knob Creek Single Barrel would be my go-to answer for favorite bourbon.
Nice.
And they have, I mean, we did a Knob Creek barrel pick on the show a little over a year ago, I believe. They have a very robust barrel picking process. They do have a really good single barrel program as well, which I know, Jake, you can talk more about that. But, I mean, and every single Knob Creek single barrel I've tried, and some, I'm sorry to say this, have not been Gold Eagle single barrels. I've tried some other ones as well. But I thought that they've always been phenomenal whenever I've done a single barrel of Knob.
Yeah, I just think it's one of the best values out there. It's minimum 9 years old, 120 proof, and sits on the shelf for under $70. Usually it's $65 right now. And I haven't really had a bad one, and they're all kind of different and unique. So they're really fun to taste and kind of compare from one to another.
Mm-hmm.
Even you guys remember when we got the sample kit, like none of them were really bad. We agreed that we'd be happy with all of them. They're just kind of different. And it was mostly like
it's getting down to like really nitpicky things when when all the samples are that good. So
right.
It's hard to be dismissive of any of those that we tried.
Yeah. Plus, I think Jim Beam in general just kind of screams Kentucky bourbon with its flavor profile. It's very, very peanutty, very nutty. Vanilla, caramel, sweet, oak, like sharp oak. So, Jim Beam is just a really good go-to to kind of explore Kentucky bourbon with their different offerings, and they're available and accessible. You're not going to have to fight anyone or have to, chase out to the store to grab anything from Jim Beam. So,
right,
typically, unless you're looking for a Boston.
Yeah. And wait,
and one thing we didn't talk about that Jim Beam also does a lot of is they have a lot of spin-offs of flavors from the Jim Beam label. So you have all your Jim Beam flavored whiskey lines. You have your Devil's Cut whiskey as well under the Jim Beam label.
Yeah, Devil's Cut is actually pretty good.
Devil's Cut is good.
I tried that at that Jim Beam masterclass that you did earlier this year. And I was actually really surprised at how good it was.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I think that whole product line from Jim Beam with Devil's Cut, Double Oak, Single Barrel, Bonded, those are all really, really good values. They all sit on the shelf right around $20 for 750 milliliter, and they're all unique. The Devil's Cut, nobody else is doing this. The Devil's Cut empties a barrel and then presses the wood so much that it squeezes out extra bourbon out of the oak staves, and that's how they get the whiskey for Devil's Cut. And it's a $20 bottle. So they're doing a lot of really cool things, and they're so huge that they can afford to keep all these items on the shelf at very reasonable prices.
Yeah. I actually use the Double Oak for cooking because it's got so much flavor. It like complements things really well. Like I use it in like barbecue sauce and stuff, and it tastes incredible.
Ooh, that sounds really good.
And I don't feel bad because it's only like $20.
And they're all 86 proof, so that's for like a beginner. That's a really good. You can, under $100 get 5 different bourbons and just kind of compare and work on developing your palate to pick up all these different flavors that you're getting from each expression.
My first experience with Jim Beam was back in college, like a lot of people's. but I didn't like whiskey at the time. But my friends made a drink that they happened to call the Instigator, which was a double shot of Jim Beam and a Red Bull. And I think you can understand why they call it the Instigator after that. But that's what I drank through college.
I think that's probably the only reason why Jim Beam has a bad rap.
Yeah. Yep.
Right, is because everyone has a bad hangover story from college of, Jim Beam was probably the first bourbon you drank and you probably mixed it with Coke. It was much cheaper than Jack Daniels. And yeah, so that's probably why Jim Beam has a bad rap. And they've also acquired and kind of built all these other brands just in the recent decade or two. So there's still a surprising amount of people that I run into that don't realize Knob Creek and Baker's and Old Grandad are all made at Jim Beam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I like the one thing I find interesting with Jim Beam. So we talked about with Buffalo Trace that a lot of their products are still extremely low priced. We talked about a lot of the Jim Beam line is very, very affordable and very good value. The Knob Creek, the 9-year for under $70 is phenomenal. And even the 12-year for under $90, I feel, or for right around $70 is a really good deal. I think what's interesting with them over the last couple of years is they've had, obviously the Knob Creek 15, the Knob Creek 18 came out at pretty high price points, but it's pretty anymore. But when you get above 10 years, it's not uncommon to see $10 per year aged. So I don't necessarily think that they're out of line versus today's pricing market. Then they you don't?
And I don't. I think they're priced well, and it's cool to be able to find a bottle of 15-year-old and 18-year-old bourbon. No other distillery is doing that except for Heaven Hill with Elijah Craig 18. Like they're kind of doing a little bit of a Scotch method, going 9, 12, 15, 18. And once those become more accessible, and they will because they're such a large distillery, that's a really cool flight to show you what age does with American whiskey or bourbon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't think they're out of line with their $10 per year when they get into older age statements. It's just it is pricier. They came out then 2 years ago with the Jacob's Well and Hardin's Creek, just the normal ones, which I thought we tried both of those in an episode a long time ago. I definitely liked I didn't like the Hardin's Creek much at all, and I thought for a 2 year at what was that, like $80 for the 2 year Hardin's Creek?
I think so.
I thought that was pretty out of line. I thought the Jacob's Well was fine, and that was a 10 year or something, I believe.
15.
15 year. 15. That one was fine. That was good. Again, for the
Jacob's
same price
Well
range.
was really good. The Colonel B Beam, I think, is the 2 year. That one was I actually did enjoy it. It was like hardcore peanut butter. So like it's not as like typical as like another. It was a highly concentrated version of like Jim Beam's flavor profile. Being at 2 years old, that I think that's a little bit to be expected. And contrasting it with a 15 year, I think was a bad choice on our part.
Yeah. Well, it was the whole intention behind that was to show that the way you run the still combined with a certain char level, you can get away with having a great tasting young bourbon.
Yep.
And a lot of the criticism was because it was $70 and it was 2 years old, but they put a lot of extra effort and thought into it. And while it did lose to Baker's in one of our blind tastings pretty handedly in the Jim Beam blind,
like a landslide, or
it was a landslide. It was like a 25-5.
Okay.
But I think we all agreed that for a 2 year against a 9 year, it was good, although it obviously didn't hold up to its 9 year version. But it was a good expression of a 2 year. It was the best 2 year I've ever had. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's cool.
Which I guess
that
isn't saying
they're,
much, but
yeah. But I think they're the fact that they're doing these kind of like experimental things is really cool. We talked about Buffalo Trace last week, and Buffalo Trace doesn't really do experiments. They do actually do some, but
They
like
do,
you'll
but
never
on a
ever
much
see one.
smaller scale.
Yeah.
They'll do
Yeah,
like
you'll never
one
get to
barrel
try
or
it.
2 barrels.
Right. It's
So-
not like where Beam is actually putting it out into the market, and it's like reasonably accessible, which is cool. I think it's it's interesting to. I don't want to turn this into a comparison between Buffalo Trace and Beam, but like it is interesting that they have very similar product portfolios, even in like the number of brands that they both carry. But Jim Beam is like unbelievably accessible, whereas Buffalo Trace isn't.
Yeah, it seems
And
like
I don't, maybe it's in part to just because people dismiss Beam, because it's the white label bourbon that nobody wants to drink.
no, I think it seems like Buffalo Trace is kind of still operating as an old school distillery. I mean, they are doing some experimental, but they're more traditional in the way they're doing things. And I mean, Jim Beam just built a new distillery on campus, the Booker No Distillery, where they intend to do a ton of experimental things out of that distillery.
Cool.
So they're, ever since Suntory came in and bought Beam, Beam has still kind of operated and done their thing, but it seems like they're adapting very quickly, which you need to be in, modern bourbon world. But they're adapting really quickly and staying ahead of the pace with experimental stuff, and giving the consumer what they want. More options, more age statements, and just different cool things to try.
Yeah, what somebody can fact check me on this, but speaking of the Suntory buyout, I had heard from somewhere, and I don't remember if it was when we were in Kentucky last year or some other place, but I had heard when Suntory came in and bought the brand that they tried to start tweaking things and like the mash bills and the recipes, and the employees actually threatened to walk if Suntory fucked with anything basically. And so they just said like, all right, fine, like hands off, do whatever you want. And like that's how they've kind of maintained their brand.
Dan's calling BS.
Dan's gonna fact check.
No, I was trying to see if it lined up because I knew that there was a workers' strike in 2016.
I'm Four Roses had a famous one. I'm pretty sure I have heard of something like this at Beam, but I'm not sure enough to talk about it.
Yeah, I can't remember where I heard it from.
But it's pretty evident that they are kind of letting them do their thing. But also, advising and supplying, some money to build like this second distillery on the campus, build a really nice restaurant. I mean, the campus of Beam it's changed so much in the last 5 years. They have a really, really nice farm to table restaurant and bar now on site. And I mean, it's a cool place. It's cool how it evolved. It was like one of the first places to have a restaurant, and it was just a little tiny barbecue pop up. But now it's like a destination to go to grab a really, really nice meal. And the campus is beautiful too, on a hill, and it kind of shows you what like a factory distillery would look like, but a nice factory, I guess.
Yeah, I think they do like multi-course like whiskey pairing dinners and stuff at the restaurant every so often, because I get emails about it from the brand. But I mean it seems like a very like you said, destination kind of experience now, which we talked about that I think a few episodes ago, that's how a lot of these distilleries are going to have to start competing, is drawing people in to the actual locations.
Absolutely.
And giving experiences.
So the worker strike at 2016 did happen with the purchase, or when Suntory purchased Jim Beam, but it was more over labor contracts versus.
Okay. Well,
Changing
my story
things.
is more fun, so
A ton more fun.
Labor strikes are awesome. They're super fun to talk about. Question for you guys I wanted to ask is what are your guys' personal thoughts on bookers?
I've never had one that I was like totally blown away by. And I hunted them for a while because Roberto was really big on them.
Why would you listen to Roberto? Like that seems like mistake number one in your life.
I've been not like disappointed with all of the ones I've tried, but like they've never been anything particularly special to me. At the end of the day, they're blends, right? None of them are single barrels.
Yeah, they're blends.
Small batch.
They should be like I would expect them to be of a bit higher caliber than the ones I've tried have been, especially if they're a blend and not a single barrel.
So, in my opinion, coolest packaging in all of whiskey. I absolutely love the
I'd
wooden
agree with
box.
that.
I love the hard plastic cover on the front. The bottle looks amazing on its own without the box. Great bourbon inside, but I still think Knob Creek single barrels, taste-wise, are better than Booker's.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with the packaging too, you get that nice little tag with the story of the blend on it. I've been the same way. I was wondering. I think it's always been fine, but I've always thought, hey, this is just fine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the price tag fits what the value you get out of the whiskey is. I'm not saying that it was just like not knowing age and things when you try one.
I don't know.
It's just everyone I've tried has just been kind of like, this doesn't taste like $100 whiskey.
I don't think the price point is too bad, but the fact that you can't find it now anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we only get like 6 bottles per release, and it's turning into like a premium allocated item where, you know, Knob Creek single barrels hit the shelf all the time and take a little bit to move through.
Yeah. I mean, you get like 3 Knob Creek barrels a year, don't you?
Yeah, which they're
Like,
you know,
they're always good.
they're always good. They're still not like we can order whenever we want, but we have enough to most of the time keep the shelf full. And they're always
Yeah.
really
And
good.
they're
I mean,
affordable. Too.
another landslide. Our last at the Jim Beam tasting, the same one that the Bakers took down the Jacob Beam. We had a Knob Creek single barrel take down Booker's, and it was like 25 votes to 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always been my thought. Is I've never been blown away with Booker's. I do. I mean, one of the coolest. Like I try to be creative with bottles and things to be able to get more value out of them. But like the Booker's, the box with the clear plexiglass front is awesome for storing corks in.
Yeah.
Because you can have a nice little display of all your corks.
Have you been to the Gold Eagle
I know
Bar?
you guys got one at the bar. Yeah, the Gold Eagle Bar. But yeah, I've just never been huge on it. And then when we did that barrel pick, one of the barrels we tried was from the Booker warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't, we took a normal Knob Creek over the Booker's one too. And I don't know. I don't want to talk bad about it, but I just don't think it's worth the hype or worth the chase that a lot of people do for it. I think it's fine, but yeah, I'd still have a Knob Creek single barrel.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's hype around it, and the fact that it's like becoming more scarce. I think is driving a lot of people to like go and hunt for it. But yeah, when there's other stuff that's always available, and like, you know, even like Knob 12 is like on shelves like 2 or 3 times a year, and I say that's
you can almost walk into you can walk into a lot of liquor stores. Well, a couple months ago, I'm not sure if there was a release or not again.
We still can't
I've
keep it on
walked into a bunch
shelves,
of liquor
but
stores and seen it.
I do know it gets like very wide distribution, and it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, there'll be even more. They'll be begging you to take it away in a few years.
Yeah. They'll come out with like trio sets with 12, 15, and 18 year Little vertical mini packs. I mean, that'll be cool when you can get a single barrel 12, 15, and 18 year and a little 200 milliliter gift set.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of been my one big knock on Beam is mainly just the Booker's line. Like, nothing wrong with it. I just don't think it's worth the hype. Like what we hate on some other distilleries for some of the hype that's surrounded by them. I think that's the biggest hyped up product they have.
Yeah.
Little
But
Books, I had one that I liked a lot. The next one I tried was okay.
Little books
but
are
I mean, they got
I
kind
very
will say
different
though that like
one to another.
like the only like I think it's fine to knock the Bookers and Little Book a little bit, but at the same time, like I don't know what else from Beam you would consider to be like an allocated product. Like besides their like special releases like Knob 18, like they don't have something like equivalent to like Pappy 12 or something where it's like extremely
They have a
difficult to get.
couple signature lines that are you never really see. That are in super
Hardin's
fancy
Creek
bottles.
is kind of
Yeah, I mean,
but
like the Hardin's Creek is like
it's
kind of
also
their
not like
experimental line. I would probably consider like Knob 15 and 18 year for now being allocated.
yeah
They do make a couple things that are only sold at the distillery. Like right now, they have like a Heritage blend, I think that's like $250, and it's only available at the distillery. But I guess like Booker's is kind of like a kind of its own thing. But it would probably be like most comparable to Buffalo Trace Antique Collection,
yeah
I think, because it's a blend of their most coveted barrels, at barrel proof, and that's actually really the only thing they put out at barrel proof on a consistent basis. Because even the single barrels in Knob
Yeah, that's a
Creek,
good
not
point.
at barrel proof. Everything else, they add a little bit of water to.
Yeah.
yeah that's a good point.
Kind of like, I don't know, I would compare it to like a GTS, I guess, but they're not as old.
Yeah.
They're 7 years, but I'm sure they're blending in some older stuff too with the younger whiskey.
Yeah. So Jake, have you tried any of your Hardin's Creek, your Frankfort, or Clearwater yet, or are you just waiting to get all
No,
three
I'm waiting
before you
to
start?
get the Boston before I open those. I want to try them all together. So yeah, the three of us will have to get together and try those. 'Cause that'll be interesting.
I like the idea of all these experiments, and I think I saw that they're going to come out with a couple 100 milliliter sets, maybe, of these. My one like knock against this is like it's 17-year-old whiskey at $170, which we talk about. Once you get older, $10 a year isn't out of the question. But it's like if you're trying to do an aging experiment and you're having to find 3 really hard to find bottles at $170 a piece, so you can taste the differences. I feel like they're really stretching out the consumer on that.
Well, I will say that these were not particularly hard to find. Like, there seemed to be a decent amount of them out in the market. At least there was for Claremont and Frankfurt.
What market
but
are
maybe
you
by
in?
the time Boston started getting released? I don't know. I didn't have trouble finding them really.
we got 2 bottles of each of those, and we're saving them for our end
really?
of the year allocated
Oh,
release.
jeez.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
But
I
it sounds like Jake's been sleeping around other stores. Jake,
I
how
don't
does that
know,
make
man.
you feel?
But the other thing about Jim Beam is they, because they're owned by Suntory and they have a ton of other products tied in with their American distillery. There's a ton of Scotch brands and liqueurs and stuff that they make and own. Suntory as a whole, they have very wide distribution. So like their release number on bottles might be much larger than Buffalo Trace or Heaven Hill or these other distilleries, but they have such wide distribution and distribution outside of the U.S. too, that I think a lot of their stuff just gets spread thin all over the place versus, just to like hotspot areas.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's if you're trying to like the Four Roses box set with all the different yeast strains and all the different mash bills that you can sample through, all those was like $110 or something.
Yeah, genius idea on their part, but it was not priced friendly.
No,
I mean, you get for 500 milliliters. We actually had it for 130. That was the suggested retail price, and for 500 milliliters of whiskey, proof down to 104, I think it was, or 102. Still really cool, and I wish more distilleries did stuff like that, because you won't have a chance, to kind of compare all the different mash bills and yeast strains in a consistent blend like that, because you could collect all the single barrels, and that would cost you $1,000+. But they're also single barrels, so it's not a good representation of each mash bill and yeast strain. So this was really cool. It was, an opportunity to compare every single product that they make to another. But yeah, I mean, not something you're going to daily drink.
Right.
At over $100.
I mean, and that's the thing is, like, I like to see all these different experimental things people are doing, and then being able to taste them side by side. I would like to see them come out with something a little bit more affordable for this, just because you're having to hunt for a bottle. You're spending close to $200 per bottle. So you're almost $600 in for to try three different things. They're just aging experiments, basically, at the end of the day. Which again, the price per bottle with the age isn't out of line. It just seems like it's a very expensive experiment for people to try.
This is your old school mentality kicking in. I think it's cool. Yeah. I think it's cool. I think whiskey people like to geek out and nerd out with whiskey, and I would spend that money on experimental stuff from Jim Beam.
Yeah, clearly.
I'm fine being in the minority. I'm fine being a crotchety old man, like always.
I get your point. I see your side, and there's probably a handful of listeners that agree with you. But
if there's a handful of listeners that agrees with us, that's our entire listener base. Just want to do the math on that real quick.
I mean, how much is in a handful? We're up to what, like 50 to 100 per episode?
Yeah, about 100.
That's a pretty accurate range.
Yeah,
really narrowing it down there.
I mean, that's that's more than a handful. Come on, give ourselves some credit here.
Yeah. I'd say like 5% are probably agree with Dan.
Yeah, that's a smart part of the listener base, at least. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the Jim Beam line's good. I think Basil gets a lot of hate. I think it's a great starter whiskey. I still think Basil 10 is a really good whiskey.
Yeah, it's a really good starter whiskey.
I liked I like the Basil Toast way better than Elijah Toasted.
I don't know. I thought
Basil
Toast was very controversial.
Yeah, I've heard. I personally like it, but I've heard some people were really turned off by it.
So
I'm not really sure why.
Well, fun fact about Basil Toast is it's also a different mash bill. They use brown rice instead of rye.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of its one-off mash bill, and you had to think that they probably just did like an experimental run of brown rice whiskey, and it didn't maybe turn out how they wanted it to, and so they finished it in toasted barrels. And again, not saying it's bad, but it's another. We know Basil's always at 80 proof, so I think a lot of the whiskey geeks or people who kind of have more of a developed advanced palate, 80 proof just doesn't do it for them, and that's also probably where a lot of the hate comes from on the Basil Hayden line.
Yeah, I mean, I tried that the malted rye a few episodes ago. That actually could be like 10 episodes ago now. But I liked it a lot. It was pretty good.
But yeah,
I feel like had I not tried some other malted ryes, I probably would have passed on this and been like, oh, whatever, it's another Basil Hayden. But like, yeah, I'm kind of rethinking that now.
Well, you're a
because I
multi-rye
was
fan,
actually
so
impressed by it. So
Yeah. yeah, it's a really good, like, anyone who's new into whiskey. Jim Beam. Well, Jim Beam kind of hits everything. It hits your connoisseur and it hits your new new whiskey drinker with the whole $20 Devil's Cut line and then the Basil Hayden line for a little more premium.
Well, I mean, even like the Granddad line is like, I think universally acclaimed for being really good, cheap whiskey.
Yeah, and to tie the two brands together, fun fact: the old Granddad on the bottle is Basil Hayden.
Yeah,
That is a very fun fact.
It is,
Jake.
isn't
Thank
it?
you for that knowledge, Bob. It's a tasty little nugget.
It is
there.
a tasty little nugget. But yeah, so my other theory is kind of like old Granddad and Basil Hayden. They're really the same thing, but they dressed up the Basil Hayden bottle to hit a whole new target market. Instead of your old school handle drinker, now they're hitting all these high end new people into the category. But I guess like this is why we all picked Jim Beam as our one of 6 distilleries to keep if we were to only pick 6 distilleries to keep, because they have such a wide variety of products that they satisfy every whiskey drinker's palate in a way. I think we can all agree on that.
We touched on it earlier, but they have such a distinct like peanut profile that's very unique in the category, I would say. And like it's definitely something that like I reach for as like a dessert substitute a lot of times. 'Cause I'm not a huge like sweet dessert person, so I like a little bit of savory, and like that peanut note just like hits perfectly.
Yeah. And two, for like people that are more cocktail people than straight bourbon, or your people that like a little bit of flavor in your whiskey, they have their entire flavored whiskey line that is, again, really inexpensive, and you can make some great cocktails with the flavors.
It's the second time you pushed the flavored whiskey line. Are you?
Hey,
It's worth mentioning because we probably wouldn't have mentioned
it's a big
it.
part of their portfolio.
Yeah, I mean the Knob Creek
I
Maple,
would not have mentioned it.
I think is an underrated flavored whiskey that you can just make an old fashioned and you don't need any simple syrup. Just add a little bit of bitters and you're good to go.
Yeah. I think it's important because when you talk about why are, like, I think a lot of people would be shocked to hear that they're the world's #1 selling bourbon. Well, part of it's they got big distribution through Suntory. But two, I think a lot of it is you hit a lot of these flavor profiles that people get that aren't big whiskey fans that draws them in at least and gets them to buy those bottles. So, just my 2 cents.
Nice.
Anything else we want to talk about with Jim Beam or their things? I know we didn't really talk too much about Bakers at all. Bakers for me, I guess, kind of middle of the road. I've never really sought after a ton of Bakers. I've had some that I've liked. I've had some that I thought were okay. I don't own a Baker's bottle in the collection.
It's a Knob
what do you guys
Creek.
thoughts
I think
on
it's a
Bakers?
Knob Creek knockoff. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, it came out after Knob Creek, and they were kind of like, "All right, how do we get more money out of these Knob Creek barrels? Because it's the same mash bill as Knob Creek, and
Yeah, same mash bill.
Yeah, I mean, it's
it's lower
they're always
proof and a
single
higher
barrels
price
at 107, right?
than Knob Creek single barrels. Yeah,
107 proof. I'd equate Bakers to like the Blantons for Jim Beam, where it's their like premium single barrel
Tater
product.
bait. It's a sharp
Tater
looking
bait.
bottle. It's lower proof, single barrel. But also it used to be a small batch, and then it was a rebrand. Like 5 years ago, it was a small batch, 7-year, and it was like $50, under $50, and now it's about 70, single barrel. But you do get a little more
every
age.
once in a while you get one like that one that we bought or that you had at the tasting event was like a 9-year.
Yeah, I was gonna say you do get sometimes you get a little more age because it does say 7-year on the bottle, but I do love how on the necker they put the exact year and month that it was aged.
Yeah. So yeah, and you can get lucky and get something a bit older in there.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's cool.
But
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go out of my way.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you have to assume that they were tasted and determined that they drank with a little too much heat at 120 proof. So all right, let's move this over to the Booker's line or the Baker's line instead of Knob Creek. That's what I kind of assume.
Yeah.
But teach their own.
Anything else on Jim Beam for today?
I don't know. I'm kind of trying to think about what we missed, but we did cover a lot too.
Legion is the other thing. I think you mentioned that, Dan.
Yeah, and that's a different mash bill.
Yeah,
that's like
its
one
own
that's under
mash
different
bill, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to think that was
is
that was
that
a
always-
Centauri thing.
Yeah.
Is that always finished? Isn't it like a port finish or something?
Sherry, I think.
Or sherry?
But it's like a Japanese style American bourbon or American whiskey.
What does that mean?
I don't know. I thought I remember reading that somewhere. I don't know what the story exactly, but it did come out after Centauri acquired them. It's a new mash bill, and I think it's meant to be like a softer, more approachable drinker, because of the mash bill style, and I think it's sherry finished. What's
It's
the
partially
stats, Dan?
finished in wine and sherry casks.
Okay.
But it's more than that. It pushes the boundaries for how bourbons can be created while remaining true to the core bourbon principles. It's a
But it's
collaboration
more-
between two whiskey legends,
See,
Fred No and Shinji Fukuyo.
yeah, so it is a
okay.
Japanese like influence, and they're combining their unique styles to create Legent, and it celebrates Kentucky tradition and Japanese detail.
Okay.
Yep. It's aged in sherry and red wine.
So I'm not just spewing
Yes.
random thoughts.
Like normal.
No.
Yeah, I've never. I don't think I know. I've never bought a bottle of Legion. I don't think I've ever really even tried a ton of it. There's just.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever tried it.
I mean, I should.
Wine finished things don't really interest me anymore. I just don't care for them.
Okay. Other than
No
that,
need to
then
be a total asshole about that.
Jesus. Kind of sounded like me, crotchety old man. style there. I don't drink.
I was just about to say the same
Well,
thing.
it's just saying. Like, I don't drink wine finished things, really. I thought it was an interesting
I'm
thing
with you.
to contribute, but apparently not.
I mean, I'm not a huge fan of wine finish, but I'm not, I'll still give them a fair chance. Just doesn't really appeal to my palate.
Yeah. All right.
Nice.
Cool.
Well, again, this was right after Thanksgiving. This will come out on Sunday the 26th, which I think, Jake, you still have a store sale going on if people are listening to this on Sunday.
If you're listening to this, 15% off 3 or more Gold Eagle barrel picks. So that is, we never put our barrel picks on sale. This is kind of like a once a year opportunity. Go to goldeaglewine.com. You can shop our entire inventory, search Gold Eagle pick to pull up all the single barrels that we have in stock. And then definitely make sure you follow us on Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine, Facebook at Gold Eagle Spirits to stay up to date with all of our sales, promotions, and new items coming to the store.
and you still have the Whiskey Acres toasted barrel?
We do still have it. It is moving. I think we're down to like 5 or 6 cases left, and we're getting a lot of really good feedback on that. So definitely don't miss that Whiskey Acres toasted barrel. I think I grabbed like
and the
4
limit's
bottles.
off, right?
Limits off. So if you already purchased some, and this is one that we did have a lot of people say, I bought 2 bottles. Can I buy more? Like I tried it. So it's proven to be a good barrel. don't sleep on this Whiskey Acres pick. I guarantee you will not be disappointed.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
Jake, where can people listen to us or leave us comments about how I'm right with my 5% of the follower group?
You can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can watch us on Spotify and YouTube. Leave comments. You can actually comment on Spotify as well as YouTube, obviously. So yeah, leave comments. You can also email us at bourbonmatters@gmail.com if you really feel like going on a rant. And I'll just forward it to Dan. And then, next week we're continuing the series with the greatest distillery of all time.
Oh, God.
Heaven Hill.
Weird, I feel a cold coming on. I don't think I'm going to be on that episode next week.
So yeah, then through the end of the year, basically, up until Christmas Eve, we're continuing the Big Six. And then we'll wrap up the year with our whiskeys of the year. I think next week we'll announce the rules for our blend off because we still need to hash those out.
I was going to say, I mean, I like the rules you came up with.
Yeah, we'll have.
I like the rules that there are no rules.
Yeah,
I think
we all know you're going to cheat anyway.
We need to have some kind of boundary.
Yeah,
I'm not going to cheat. I'm just going to Bill Belichick it.
Yeah.
I'm going to play loose with the
Cheat
rules.
but not get caught.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Well, he gets caught. He's got to play loose with the rules.
So yeah, next week we'll announce those rules. Then we'll have about a month, to complete our blends. And then I think we're gonna try and do a live taste off. So more details on that to come. Because the three of us can't vote, it won't be fair. So we need a bigger voting pool.
Yeah.
Also coming up in a few short episodes. I mean, Jake, you could do it now. You could admit you're going to admit defeat here pretty soon on our Bears-Packers bet for who ends up better in the NFC North. So whenever you want to announce what bottle you're going to give me out of your collection, that'd be great.
Screwball.
Had to be over $50. We had a $50 floor on that.
All right. I'll find something for you. Don't worry. But this bet is not over yet.
Yeah,
but at this point, I'd rather have a better draft pick. So I'm kind of on your side. I know it's a good excuse for us. I'm gonna roll with it.
That's what the Bears say every year. Is I can't wait for the better draft pick, and then every year you keep asking for better draft picks, and every year you think you'd get it better and wouldn't have to worry about better draft picks.
It's just the Bears' way. That's how we do it.
Yeah, seriously.
All right, guys.
See you next week.
I would cheers you with my thing, but I got a coffee mug, and it's not going to make it.
I got it here. Cheers. Oh, Jesus.
Cheers.
Cheers.